We want to welcome this morning a special guest speaker. His name is Ronny Simone. I first met Ronny on my first trip to Israel. He was our tour guide, and I was so impressed with his teaching gifts and his knowledge that we went ahead and we booked a tour to Israel ourselves. We had Ronny be our tour guide as well. But since that time, Ronny and I and our church have gone to be good friends, and we appreciate every time he comes out to the States. He remembers us and asks if we have a time where he can come out and speak, and of course we always make time for Ronny. So he's going to give us a Middle East update this morning. So please welcome Ronny Simone.
This one was set for me.
Yeah.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I do want to thank Pastor Phil for the opportunity to be here. Not my first time. It's always good to stand with friends of Israel and be able to share with you an update from the Middle East. This is not the usual message that you hear in the Sunday morning service. But as Americans, as Christians, as human beings, we need to be educated. And regardless of what the American administration is promising, sooner or later, you will be involved once again with boots on the ground. It's almost inevitable. It's going to be a very personal matter to every American, as it was in Iraq, as it was in Afghanistan. The Middle East is changing in front of our very eyes, and changing in a negative way. And therefore, my plan for the next hour or so is to try to give you just an overview. Nuggets, that's a good word in English, nuggets. Will be possible to go deeper to understand what happens on a daily basis, because every day something new happens. I can see by some of you, the way that you look at me, that you have a hard time with my accent. It's English with an accent, all right? So give yourselves a minute or two and you'll get used to that, and that will be the biggest obstacle for this morning. I'm going to use the electronics, and I'm going to use the presentation, and you have a triple challenge this morning. Number one is get used to my accent. Number two, try to follow some of the information on the screens and try to synchronize what I'm saying with what comes up. It's not always well synchronized. It will keep you on your toes. And the plan is to try to, once again, to give you some overview about what is going on. I bet you that in about 100 years, historians will look back at our era and will say, nodding their heads sadly, that world leaders of the early 21st century learned nothing from world leaders of the early 20th century. We are destined to repeat the same mistakes, refuse to learn from history, and what we see in front of our very eyes is absolutely amazing. When you go back home after service, if you will to open the map of the Middle East, you can mark big red X's on countries that no longer exist. There was no country called Syria, there was no country called Iraq, no country called Libya. Question about Yemen, Lebanon, these countries cease to exist. And therefore, the changes are happening every day. And so far, it's not even a problem that the world should be concerned with, because as for now, Muslims are killing Muslims. We speak about hundreds of thousands of people that were killed in behalf of the Muslim faith, and that's before they take the war to the real enemy, and that's Israel and the US of A. One would only imagine what would be the nature of that war based on what we see that happens within the Muslim faith. I'm not going to speak against Islam. I'm not a theologian, but I don't have to. It's enough to see what people are willing to do in behalf of their religion to give us a big warning. And please make no mistakes. It's not a limited problem in the Middle East. It's a worldwide issue. It is quite amazing when we see what happens. And therefore, if you bear with me for about an hour, we'll try to speak about what happens in the Middle East. I won't even say much about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. All right, because that's not the main issue. I'm going to speak about the region from an Israeli point of view. I guess if you'll have a chance to listen to a speaker that comes from the Arab countries, the message will be somewhat different, but not totally different. And therefore, we need to know the facts. The last thing I want to do is propaganda. I don't want to be biased. I try to stay objective. And the facts you're going to hear from me are impossible to challenge. I'll challenge you to challenge the facts. The problem is that we refuse to have eyes open, refuse to listen to what is being said, because we have to give some credit to the Arab world. They don't hide their intention. They say loud and clear what is the plan. We just refuse to listen. Because if you listen and you fully understand the danger, that requires action. And people are sick and tired from bloodshed and wars all the time. The question is, what's the alternative? Unless we do something now, in 5 years we'll wake up to a much worse situation. And I'm not trying to promote war in this area, in this country, but I come from Israel, and we live in a tough neighborhood. And we see how the tension is building up on our borders. We know what is the final goal of our neighboring countries, and we cannot take action to stop it because officially nothing happened yet. There was a lot of war between clans and tribes in the Middle East. Why is the world concerned? Why is the West sending troops to fight against ISIS? Because of the terrible beheadings? They are terrible. Would we do the same with tribes in Africa, fighting one against the other with much more casualties? We simply ignore them. What makes the Middle East such a central point, a focal point of tension, as it always had been, a place of conflict? For some reason, when the unrest started, the world media called it the Arab Spring. That's a bit of a deception. Won't you say so? The Arab Spring? Maybe the freezing Muslim winter? How about that? And not the Arab Spring. But it started with so much optimism, it looked like something good is happening. How wrong we were. Only 4 years ago, it looked like the Arab people are going to change the way of life, get rid of their dictators, and live in democracy. That's not what we see. So we need to understand mindset. We need to understand mentality. Because if you try to view the Middle East coming from a healthy American common sense, you don't have a chance to even begin to understand what is the true nature of the problem with it. In the US, and I dare to say in the West, and include myself in the West, when you have a problem, you sit at the table, you negotiate, you find a solution. It doesn't work like that in the Middle East. And a few things have to be clear because you need to understand the mindset. If world leaders know about the Middle East, what they studied in Princeton, Yale, or Harvard, they don't know the Middle East. You need to understand how people think over there. You need to understand where they're coming from. If you are calling Iran to the table in Lausanne, Switzerland, and start negotiating, let me tell you how it's taken on the other side. Only the weak party is willing to negotiate. That's what the Quran teaches, by the way. So if the weak party is asking for negotiations, why stop the pressure now? You're winning, you're the strong party. We just refuse to understand it. If you're strong, you don't make concessions. If you're strong, you go and get it. That's the mindset of the desert, that's the mindset of clans, that's the Middle East. And we do not understand it. You want to find an honest solution, so we ask them to come to the table. And look at the results. They are winning. And meanwhile, speaking about Iran, we ignore totally what happens on the ground. Iran is controlling 4 capitals in the Middle East. Beirut, Damascus, Baghdad, and now Sana'a in Yemen. Everything is decided upon in Tehran. They did not start the unrest, they take full advantage of it while we are hesitating what is the right thing to do. Few things which are important, again, you hear that from the Israeli perspective. I guess I need to stand a little closer. Can you hear me if I stand like that? Is that okay? Yeah. All right. Well, number one, as we said, the Middle East is changing. Those countries no longer exist, and maybe we'll see the birth of new countries, like a country for the Kurds, the largest minority in the world that doesn't have a country, 20 million people that live in Turkey and in Iraq and in Syria and in Iran. It's not going to happen because Turkey will never allow the Kurds to have an independent state. Cynically, we're using them to do the battle on the ground, the Peshmerga. They are hoping to be organized as a state. It's not going to happen. Maybe we'll see a state for the Druze, another minority in the region. It's possible that the Middle East is going to change totally with some new entities, but time will tell. So far, we don't really know. But one thing is quite evident. For many, many decades, the whole world was in the opinion that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the most dangerous conflict in the world. If you only give them a little more, the world tried to convince Israel, that will bring peace to the Middle East, and that will diffuse the main reason why people go to war in that area. Hallelujah. That was the idea. Until the world begins to understand. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a minor conflict. It does not affect the world. The Middle East has much bigger problems than Israeli-Palestinians. Some people accuse us to be the reason for all the evil over there. Let me tell you what, if anything, we are part of the solution. We're not the problem. So in the midst of a turbulent area, there is one country that enjoys prosperity and tranquility, looking with amazement about what happens around us. It doesn't touch us yet, but it will sooner or later. And all we can do is try to be prepared. Because those countries around us, which are still in a total chaos, it will end sooner or later. They're accumulating weapons like never before, and they don't do that because they're weapon collectors. They're going to use it as they did in the past. Against the only country that is a democracy, the only country that advocates human rights, including Arabs in Israel who are Israelis. And then when they're done with that, they say loud and clear, they're going to take it to the big Satan, and that's you, ladies and gentlemen. They don't hide their intention. We just refuse to listen. Another amazing thing is that the old fault line of treaties and friendships in the Middle East is also changing. So far it was a clear fault line. Israel on one side and all the other Arab countries on the other side. That's no longer the case. What happens in the Middle East is a real threat to many of these sovereign states. And suddenly we find ourselves good friends and allies, not officially by the way, with Saudi Arabia. Who would think about that a year ago? Suddenly we're on the same side with Jordan and with Egypt. And there was another side as well. So how long these interests are going to continue? And how long we're going to share those with Arab countries, that's hard to tell. But on a daily basis, the local politics are changing, new treaties are being made, some formal, some kind of under the table, but it happens every day. And what happened last week, that's old news. Unless you stay on top of things and you watch the media, you do some research every day, you are missing some of the amazing developments. The world is confused. Who are the good guys in Syria? It's a good question, because your friend today will be your enemy tomorrow. There's zero loyalty, zero friendship, everything is interest, everything is religious fanaticism. Who are the people that we need to stand with? It's a good question because nobody knows, not even themselves. A militia in Syria cannot tell you today who they're going to support next week. It changes every day. And these guys are armed to their teeth. And they're going to use those weapons, and they use them as we speak. And therefore the confusion is for a good reason. In order to understand what happens today, we need to understand the making of the Middle East. Unless we understand how the Middle East was created, it's hard to understand what we see today. And what we see today is the end of an era. The Middle East was created, so to speak, by the victors of WW1. A century ago exactly, they made all kinds of agreements how to divide the Middle East to nations that did not exist, by the way. This arrangement lasted for a century. And as I started this presentation, what we try to accomplish now is once again to get involved in the Middle East, to reshuffle people and tribes and clans over there, to recreate the Middle East. We're not learning. Everybody speaks about the war against ISIS. Well, that's the easy part. Let's say that we took ISIS out, that's not a problem. Then what? Our European politicians and American politicians are going to make decisions once again regarding the locals in the Middle East to create another problem? To come back in 50 years because they will not work together as they don't work together now. Things are not getting any better. Things are getting worse. And we insist to be involved. We want to bring democracy. Really. What if people are not interested to live in democracy? We didn't like Saddam Hussein. We don't like Bashar al-Assad. They are dictators. But let's be honest. When he was in power, the Middle East was more stable. It wasn't in chaos as it is now. So maybe we have to choose if it is our choice. Do we want democracy or stability? These in the Arab countries cannot work together. It was proven, right? And therefore, another question is, why are we involved? And why is it our problem? Part of the answer will be because when they are done there, will be the next enemy, we want to stop it as long as we can control it. Well, that's a good enough answer. The question is, what are we going to do about it exactly? And that's where the confusion begins. Here is the map of the Middle East. That's how it used to look like until the aftermath of the First World War. Please look carefully and tell me if you see a country called Syria, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Libya, Israel, Kuwait, Yemen. They're not there, huh? Interesting. Am I suggesting, therefore, that a century ago there were no countries or nations in the Middle East? That's exactly it. About a century ago, the Middle East was part of the Ottoman Empire. That's modern-day Turkey. Not divided to nations, not divided to countries. You see, the Muslim mindset is not advocating Muslim states. Because Muslim states means that they are divided. They want to have a theocracy, one entity that controls all the Muslims in the world. So to speak about Muslim nations, it's an oxymoron the way they see that. People live in clans, people live in tribes. The tribe that lives on the next mountain is not part of your nation, he is the bitter enemy. You fight for the same grazing grounds, you fight for the same source of water. You have nothing in common, just bloodshed for centuries upon centuries. So how do you create a nation? And whose decision was it to begin with? Well, the victors of the war. France, Britain, they tried to create the Middle East based on Christian principles, yes, to create nations that did not exist, basically, in order to control the area more effectively. When you went to school and they taught you about the outcomes of the First World War, let me tell you what the history teacher said in the boring history class. There was a war, one party won, one party lost. The party that won happened to be France and Britain and the USA later on, and Russia started but quit. As it is in war usually, somebody wins. Let me tell you what is the message and how they teach that in Muslim schools. The Christians defeated the Muslims. I'll say it once again because it makes all the difference in the world. The Christian world defeated Islam unconditionally because the Ottoman Empire represented the Muslims in the world. They had a sultan and they lost the war. Islam was humiliated. Do you understand the difference now? The Quran is not teaching that Muslims will be humiliated. They're supposed to win. They're supposed to have the upper hand. They will not rest until they restore the greatness of Islam. That's the plan. And once again, when you listen to the advisor of Khamenei speaking in Tehran, that the Persian Empire is restored already, and the western border of Iran is the Mediterranean Sea. Take him seriously. He represents now the Muslim world, and how unfortunate to them, he's a Shiite and not a Sunni. No time to go into details. But right now, the war in the Middle East between Shiites and Sunnis, most likely, go figure, tomorrow it may change once again. We have to understand the motivation. We have to understand the sentiment. As long as they feel that their faith was defeated, they will not rest until they'll have the upper hand. They are commanded to do so. It's not a private issue. It's a faith issue that includes all the Muslims in the world to go on jihad. Well, some do, some don't. But the motivation is still there. So the Middle East was created, how interesting, by people that were aliens to the area, did not understand those sentiments. And it was British politicians. Winston Churchill was the colonial secretary back then, and he was the one to carry out the plan in his hotel room in Cairo, and that's a fact. He opened the map of the Middle East, took a roller and marked some lines in the desert, creating nations, creating countries of people that had nothing in common. That's how Jordan was created, that's how Iraq was created, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and all the others. So how do you control tribes that were bitter enemies only a few months earlier, and what form of government will create a stable state? Democracy out of the question. Think about those clans, always fought against each other, and they are armed to the teeth. And therefore the only possibility was to create some kind of monarchies, if possible dictatorships, although the term is absolutely negative. It started with kings. The idea was, well, a king who is Allah's chosen will get the respect of all the people, but we cannot hope for democracies, we will create monarchies. Keep in mind, the decision was made for the people without asking what they want. But once again, you just lost the war, you don't have much say. The British out there, the French out there, everybody's involved. What choices do you have, basically, but to accept and to do the best you can, as long as you're weak. Once you restore your strength, you're commanded to go and fight for Islam. That's what the faith teaches. So the Middle East was created in a very odd way, and here are the countries today, but keep in mind, Syria, Iraq, Libya, Lebanon, Yemen, no longer exist. Well, the main challenge was at first, and I need to do that very briefly, how do you create a national sentiment? As we said, people have nothing in common. Usually they don't even like the ruler. How do you make a nation? Well, sometimes it works in an odd way. Sometimes it can be done by a national basketball team, maybe by a national soccer team. Well, the only thing that became to be like the common denominator was the army. Everybody serves in the army. The army is protecting the country, which means that's the only place where those clansmen meet, try to form some kind of a body that will fight for the same interest. It was all the attempt to create a national sentiment. What makes the nation of America, America? What makes any nation a nation? You have to invent yourself in a way and find something that will get people together. The army became to be the most important thing. And before not too long, the army commanders that felt strong enough simply threw over the democracies and the monarchies. And we've seen those coups one after the other. And the leaders of the Middle East became to be military dictators. But there was another issue. The issue was, well, maybe we should try the whole idea of nations. It may work. But the focus should be not on the faith necessarily. The focus should be on the Arab national issue. Let's create a pan-Arab movement. Well, if you focus on the national issue, that would be maybe easier to agree upon than the religious one. We tried to focus on religion, we were defeated. Now we are organizing countries and states. Let's create a national sentiment. And there was an attempt, led by Arab leaders, to have one country that includes all the Arab people in it, not Muslims, but Arabs. And there is a difference here. Most of the Muslims around the world are not Arabs. Indonesia, about 100 million in India, Malaysia, Iran, Nigeria, Turkey, all Muslims, but not Arabs. Arab is not a nationality, Arab is not a religion, and Arab is not an ethnicity. Arab is a culture, civilization, language, way of life. You can be the national of Jordan and practice the Muslim faith, or practice the Christian faith, but you're an Arab by your civilization, by your mindset and way of life. Identity issues are not easy to figure out or to understand. All right, so the idea was, let's focus not on Islam necessarily, let's unite all the Arab peoples under one authority. The man behind the plan was the president of Egypt, Abd al-Nasser. Some of you may have heard the name. Did you know that there was a country officially that was made of Syria, Egypt, and Yemen? Between 1958 to 1961. These three countries officially were united, only for 3 years. It was all part of the attempt to create a national sentiment that's based on the Arab ethnicity and not on the Muslim faith. Confused? Of course you are, everybody is, including them over there. But we need to understand what led to what. Well, as we said, the military took over. A couple of revolutions, and the Middle East is now ruled by dictators. It's interesting that today when you see the unrest in the region, the monarchies are quite stable. Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Morocco. You will hesitate to uprise against the king who is believed to be chosen by Allah himself. But uprising against a military dictator will be easier to do, speaking about religious convictions, etc. So the Arab monarchies are not totally quiet, but they're not in chaos as the non-monarchies are. I hope that you're able to follow what led to what, because one thing they did not try yet. They tried the Arab sentiment, it wasn't really working. They forced to create those nations hoping that they're going to close the gap between the West and the Muslim world. You know, but if a state is so great, well, people should be better off. Standard of living, education, freedom, didn't work either. One thing they did not try yet as Arab nations is to follow the path of Islam. They tried it under the Ottomans as one theocracy, but not as they are divided to nationalities. Basically what we see now is religion on the table. So the idea is that who is going to represent the religious aspect? In most cases, there was one strong movement that every Muslim country has called the Muslim Brotherhood. Founded in the 30s, the same days of the Nazi party in Germany, to remind you. And if you read the writings of the founder, Hassan el-Banna is his name, from 1932, that's Mein Kampf in Arabic. The same ideology, exact. So the Muslim Brotherhood, by the way, that the US calls moderate Muslims, keep in mind, we'll speak about Egypt in a minute. The Muslim Brotherhood was the one basically that was waiting behind the scenes. And when the national agenda collapsed, they are the first ones to say, okay, let's try now the one thing we did not try. Let's go back to the sources. Let's have Arab nations, but Muslim nations and not secular nations. And so far they're winning. So far, every place that there is some unrest, the Muslim Brotherhood is taking over. Sometimes for a longer time, sometimes for a shorter time. But once again, I hope that you're able to understand the development. See, the Middle East, tough neighborhood. Every country in the region has some kind of unrest. Look where we are at. We call ourselves sometimes a villa in the jungle. One way, one look at the Middle East, and you can clearly understand. If it wasn't God's plan for us to be there and prosper, that would be an impossibility. Just look at it. We are surrounded by 300 million Arabs. Every single one of them would like to see us in the ocean. And they tried more than once. And they will try in the future again. We have no illusions about peace in the region. Not in my lifetime. Well, I'm quite old, so that won't take too long. All right. Let me suggest that there are a few ways to understand the situation. When it all started, the whole world was fascinated. People finally are fighting for their rights. Well, when you speak about fighting for rights, it sounds so right for people to fight for their rights. Now, what are the rights that people are fighting for? If they fight to live by Sharia law, and that's the agenda, what they basically fight for is oppression. They fight for persecution. They fight for zero rights for women, child abuse, fanaticism, forgive me, filth and ignorance. That's what Sharia law teaches. Do we want people to fight for these rights? They fight for the right to take the Jewish people out and to fight the Christian world. That's their right. That's what they're fighting for. Are we still so fascinated by people fighting for the rights? If the rights were really freedoms, as we understand it, but the right to live by Sharia law, that's what it teaches. It teaches ignorance, it teaches oppression, it teaches war and bloodshed. And I'm not being biased, that's what they teach. The whole world is Islam's enemy. It's in the Quran, nobody hides the intention. Do we want people to fight for such rights? Do we want them to get those rights? I'm an Israeli. Do I really want the Muslim Brotherhood to rule over Egypt and to advocate everlasting war until the Jews are in the ocean? No. I'll be selfish in that regard. Let them live under dictatorships. It's their problem. We want to live with neighbors that don't dream day and night our destruction. But that's what happens in the Middle East. And as I said, we may be first on the list, but you're not far behind. And then they said, you know what, it's not just the right that people fight for, they're going to get rid of these dictators, it's going to work quite okay. Let me suggest that what we see, and I'm not suggesting that was proven by now, we see a war within the Muslim faith. Shiites and Sunnis are butchering each other in a terrible way. You need to understand that the Shiites are making only 15% of the Muslim faith, that's it. But it will be a Shiite country that will have the bomb first, Iran, and they will have it. It's too late, we missed the point. Let me make a prediction here. Iran will have nuclear weapons. Following Iran, the whole Middle East will have nuclear weapons. So the question will be, not who has the weapon, who is better protected from the weapon, we're better protected. Let me ask you a philosophical question. Under some conditions, Iran is launching a nuclear warhead to Israel. We intercept it in the outer space, it causes no damage. Do we have the right to retaliate with nuclear weapons ourselves? I'm asking you. What say you? Well, I don't know. It's easy to say yes, and I would say yes, but it just But they found that no damage was done, so how dare you attack their nuclear weapons? That's what happens now, by the way. We had a conflict with Hamas in Gaza. They launch rockets, and we have a weapon system to shoot them down. So, well, just a minute, it never landed on your territory, you're protected, how dare you attack them? Now, just a minute now. We need to redefine the whole rules of war and wisdom and whatever here. As I said, a philosophical question. So the question is not who will have the weapon, because everybody will have it. The question is who is better protected. We are much better protected. When it takes nuclear weapons, it only needs one to hit the ground. And we cannot guarantee 100% of success to the Arrow, which is a new weapon system, not a secret, that's supposed to intercept every ballistic missile in the outer space, in the out of the atmosphere. We have it, nobody else does, by the way. So as we said, basically we see a war within Islam. And how interesting. The two powers which are behind the scenes, one openly is Iran, who is Shiite, and the other one is Turkey. Turkey plays a very important role in regional affairs. Turkey is a Sunni. Turkey is part of NATO. And by the charter of NATO, if Turkey is attacked, all of NATO should come to the rescue. If Turkey goes to war, all right, NATO is under the same obligation. So it looks like the war is between Sunnis and Shiites, but not the clans of ISIS and Yemen who are really meaningless. The real war is between the local superpowers, non-Arabs, how interesting, but Muslims, Turkey and Iran. Iran is fully behind what's going on. Turkey kind of behind the scenes, but it's very evident. The whole nature of what's going on is surfacing. Nobody can deny it anymore. It's not about fighting for rights. It's a war within the Muslim faith. That's not a very optimistic message to hear from me today. But once again, we need to understand the nature of things. Speaking about the Arab countries and about the Muslim world, well, it's not a monolith, and I'm watching the clock here. And we need maybe to understand every country, because every country has its own characteristics. Well, number one, how it influences Israel. We had elections not that long ago, and you do know that Benjamin Netanyahu won third time. And one of the reasons for his victory was really quite amazing. Not the fact that he won, but how easily he won the elections was that Israelis are watching carefully what happens around us. And it's hard to be more moderate and more willing to negotiate when you see what happens around you. I mean, if things were better around us, maybe other parties that advocate peace with the Palestinians would win. But the Palestinians are part of the Arab world. Why would we assume that they will behave differently than ISIS or all the other names, funny names of militias over there? You see, the world wants to see a new nation being born in Palestine. Let me tell you what. These people are at a civil war for years between Hamas and the PLO. You recognize as a nation. They want to be, although they are at war with one another. Is that going to add stability to the Middle East or more chaos? Do we really need another Arab country that will be just like all the others? Is that good for the world or bad for the world? Well, some need to think that there must be a Palestine. Let me tell you what, it's not going to add stability or peace to the region. So the Israeli people are looking around to say, well, it's absolutely crazy. Now you want us to make more concessions? Now you want us to give up our territory when you see what happens around you? It's the same mentality. It's the same agenda. You must be insane. So the outcomes of elections are, we're going to be a little more radical. We are responding. So it does affect the way that the average Israeli thinks, obviously, when he sees what happens around us. And once again, is there a difference if somebody was beheaded, and I'm sorry for those gross descriptions, but you've seen it on TV, or somebody was shot in the head in the middle of the street, in Gaza, for example. What's the difference? It's coming from the same mindset. Everybody's holding ISIS as, the most brutal ones. Why don't give Hamas the same privilege, so to speak? They're just as ISIS. If you use a knife, a sword, or just throw somebody from the 50th floor to his death, what's the difference? Well, as I said, if we have to make choices, if it is our decision, that's a choice. If you want democracy, you end up with chaos. If you want stability, well, I'm sorry, the only way it worked was under dictatorships. All right. Terror. Well, terror prospers, as you can read over there, in countries that have a central, weak government, territory that's still recognized by the international community as a sovereign territory. These are the places that every group of terror will build their bases, a state within a state, because the host country that hosted them against their will are not strong enough to control their territory. And that conditions prevail in countries around Israel. The case in Lebanon, when Hezbollah, a militia, much stronger than the Lebanese army, a proxy of Iran, is calling the shots. Same thing in Syria, total chaos. Even Jordan is not that safe. Even Egypt, a sovereign country, there was a place called the Sinai Peninsula where the tribes of Israel fought for 40 years. It's a no man's land. Egyptian territory, they don't control the area. And guess what happens over there? Tens of thousands of local Bedouin tribes, Al-Qaeda, World Islam, World Jihad, you name the name. They're there, building bases on Egyptian sovereign soil, on Israel's borders. It happens all around us. And we see it happen and we cannot retaliate because technically nothing happened yet. But every now and then they fire a rocket into Israel. If we dare to retaliate against Egyptian territory, and we are at peace with Egypt, they say, just a minute now, it's our sovereign territory. And we say, yes, but you don't control your territory. And these people are fighting against us. Either you control it, or we'll help you to control it. You cannot do that. By international law, you cannot do it. So you understand some frustration in my voice. I'm sure that you hear it by now. It's really frustrating. You see what happens, you know what's the end goal, and you can do nothing to stop it, but you can still control it. Let me give you some examples from the past. 1967, there was a war called the Six-Day War. Israel had an amazing victory over the Arab countries. The king of Jordan, Hussein, back then, the late King Hussein, gave shelter in his sovereign territory to the PLO, Palestinians back then. Not just Palestinians. In Jordan's territory, since the king was quite weak back then, the IRA built bases, the Irish in Jordan, the Japanese Red Army. You tell me what the Japanese have to do with Israel or the Middle East. But it was just a haven, a sovereign territory of a country with a weak central government. The German Baader Meinhof, I'm reminding you, some of you are too young to know. Maybe you've seen the movie Munich. In the late 60s, early 70s, these were terror groups, not Muslims, amazingly, that caused a lot of headaches to European countries. The Italian Red Brigades. And each one had bases in Jordan. Until the king of Jordan had enough. Sent his army in, butchered more than 20,000 people. But we've been there. And then it happened in Lebanon. A very weak central government that gave room to the PLO. The PLO had a state within a state until 1982, and now Hezbollah. And we see that happening in Egypt now. May happen in Jordan as well, in Syria, happens already. So we know the dynamic. We know how it works. When the governments around us are not functioning, that's fertile ground for terror. And that terror may fight against the regime first, but will be next in line. So at least we are learning some of history because most people don't. All right? Let's have a word about Egypt. I refuse to speak against America's policy. I will not speak against President Barack Obama. All right? He is America's president, he was elected, and he has the right to do whatever he thinks is good for America. I can almost say it's your problem, but not quite so. It's the world's problem. June of 2009, Obama went to Cairo, addressed students in Cairo University. Muslim clerics were invited as well. I don't think that that was his intention. I cannot say that. But the outcomes of the speech that he gave maybe ignited what we see in the Middle East. History will tell. Because he said basically the following: the US is not an enemy of the Muslim world. It's a legitimate statement to make. The policy was that America is going to side with moderate Muslims to fight against militant Muslims. It's a legitimate policy to make. The question is, who do you call moderate? And the US administration is considering the Muslim Brotherhood as moderate Muslims. They say it loud and clear. If the Muslim Brotherhood is moderate, well, who are the militants? So the way that the speech was taken, I'm saying once again, I don't think it was his intention. But if you're a Muslim cleric, and you sit in the audience, and the president of the superpower of the world tells you, basically looking into your eyes, we can work together. Hey, just a minute now. Egypt has a president called Hosni Mubarak. Are you going to work with the Muslim Brotherhood, the opposition against the regime? Before not too long, all hell broke loose in Egypt. Because most likely that's what they understood. Maybe it wasn't Obama's intention, but that's what they understood. And in a way they were right. And therefore in 24 hours, the US officially stated, we are not supporting President Mubarak, we are supporting this coup because, hey, they just fight for their rights. And next is what we see now. So once again, was the intention of the president to create that? I don't think so. But it's not what you're saying. It's how it is understood by the listeners. And if you don't know what's the motivation, how do you understand the president of the superpower of the world is coming to appease us? But just a minute, we are taught in our books that if anybody is reaching out, he's weak. It's our obligation to intensify the pressure. Maybe that's how it happened. Time will tell. Only time will tell. But Egypt is quite amazing. We are at peace with Egypt. And the problem was that unrest in Egypt affected immediately the Sinai Peninsula. You see that area over there? That's Sinai, Egyptian territory. We don't have even a border between the two countries because we are at peace. And therefore anybody can cross, including not just drug dealers as they do sometimes, but terrorists. And if you try to stop them from crossing, just a minute now, say the Egyptians, don't you trust us? We're allies. No, we don't trust you. Oh, but you're at peace, so what? Sinai is a large area, mountainous landscape that the Egyptians don't control. It's a shelter to every terror group around the world, have the bases. Now the Egyptians finally moved the army inside. I don't know to what extent you get news from the Middle East. Every day Egyptian soldiers are being killed by the coalition. Only recently some of those tribes played allegiance to ISIS, another part of ISIS. There was a war going on Israel's borders. It's not our problem yet, it's Egyptian problem. And we say, hey, we are allies now, let us help. We are the main enemy. Egypt says, no way. It's our territory. You know what? Finally, they started to control the territory because now it's dangerous for Egypt's stability. But these guys are Muslim Brotherhood. And therefore, they had the elections, amazingly. And the elections, who won? Some of you may remember. 75% of the vote went to Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists. Listen, the people had spoken. I mean, it was free elections. Free elections. What a shock it was. So, hey, people are fighting for the rights, there would be democracy. Impossible that the radical Muslim agenda will win. 75% of the vote. That's a big victory. You cannot say, some kind of misunderstandings. It wasn't really, say, kosher in that regard. It wasn't really legal what happened over there. That's what people want. But we saw 1 million people at the main square of Cairo demonstrating for freedom. 1 million out of 90 million? That's what we saw. 80 million people in Egypt do not advocate democracy. They like it as it is. Why would anybody in his right mind, when he has a chance to vote, will vote in for a party that guarantees poverty, ignorance? You explain that to me. Would you vote for such a party? They did. In every Muslim country that had elections, the Muslim Brotherhood won. And there was no room for any negotiations. And then there was another crew, the army, was striking back to reconquer power. By the way, the American administration officially is not supporting Assisi's government. Because Assisi was not elected by democratic means. They outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood. As simple as that. 75% of Egyptians did not participate in the elections. So the US says, well, it's not a legitimate regime, we don't support it. So who are you supporting? I'm telling you loud and clear, Muslim Brotherhood. The people have spoken. It's impossible that everybody in Egypt will vote for the Muslim Brotherhood unless we don't understand what they're standing for. You see, that's the Western mindset. Why would anybody vote for somebody that guarantees poverty, as we said, ignorance? We don't get it. They do. And we refuse to understand. So now there is a new regime, and this regime is not recognized by the US as a legitimate one. Interesting. Is Saudi Arabia such a great democracy? Or Qatar? You're supporting them. So there's always an agenda, a plan behind a plan. Not everything is on the table. If there was one standard, that doesn't make any sense. So, after we spoke about the Egyptians, I'm sorry, I have to run a few things through because I have 10 more minutes. And what about Jordan? Jordan is another country that we have peace with, and Jordan is on our eastern border. If you look at the map, since Iraq is no longer Iraq, but controlled by Iran, you do see that Jordan is the last line, so to speak, between Iranian influence and Israel. And the king of Jordan is accused by Muslims all around the world. Why are you going to be the last shield to protect the Jewish state? He's holding on quite well so far, supported by the US, supported by Israel. One of two scenarios that I can see with my limited knowledge about the Middle East, that Israel will be involved with boots on the ground in Jordan, is if Jordan collapses. And Iran has free access all the way to the River Jordan, by the way, 20 miles from Jerusalem. If that happens, we want to meet the Iranians in the mountains of Jordan, and not by the Western Wall. So if Jordan collapses, which may be the case, Israel will have to retaliate immediately, but so does the US. So Jordan is a very important player because of its location. So far so good, they are holding on relatively okay. But in our nightmares, we can see this. I couldn't find an Iranian tank, so that's an Israeli tank. They will have free access all the way to Israel. So Jordan suddenly becomes to be a key player. And we are very concerned about what happens there. By the way, 70% of Jordanians will call themselves Palestinians. It's not a democracy. The king of Jordan, Abdullah II, is representing 30% of the people, ruling with an iron fist, more moderate maybe than others, but he does not represent the will of the people. I have to say, thank goodness for that. We don't want him to represent the will of the people in this case. Once again, I'm being selfish. You hear the Israeli side, which I believe should be the American side as well. Another country which gets the world's attention, obviously, is Syria. But it's quite amazing. Until there were reports that the Syrian army used chemical weapons, nobody cared about what happened in Syria. And by then, more than 200,000 people were murdered by the regime. Regime soldiers were killed by those militias as well. Nobody really cared about it. Because each time the UN tried to make decisions, it was simply foiled by Russia or China. But once there were some reports about using chemical weapons, the world would not tolerate that. And the question was, okay, who are we going to support now? Who are the good guys or the bad guys? Amazingly, let me tell you, the only group we can trust on to deliver, even a war against ISIS, is the regime in Syria. The regime which is so hated, and the whole world wants to see a new regime over there, the only group in Syria that can deliver, which is still disciplined, and really wants to take out ISIS, is the regime in Syria. So just like the US is working with Iran in Iraq to fight against ISIS, we may see the same thing supporting the regime in Syria for the same reason. By the way, in Yemen, Iran and the US are not such good friends. It's amazing, all right? Let me try to rephrase it. Politicians are gathering in Switzerland, like on another planet totally, and speak about nuclear issues, while on their ground, the US in one front is backing Iran in Iraq and fights against Iran in Yemen. What's going on? Do you understand how complicated that is? As for today, may change tomorrow, may change in 5 minutes, because everything is so dynamic. So Syria, of course, is a very important player because of its location. You do see once again, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. Since Iraq, again, doesn't exist anymore, no central government over there, total chaos. Iran has free access all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, including helping the proxies in Lebanon. Hezbollah, a Lebanese militia, was founded by Iran, is supported by Iran financially. All the weapons are going through Syria to Lebanon. We control the airspace. We won't let anybody fly over knowing what they carry. We control the seas as well. We don't control the land borders. And therefore, from the Iranian perspective, Syria is a crucial link. Without crossing Syrian territory, they cannot get closer to our borders. And we are the main target. Well, let me ask you, by the way, what is the problem of Iran with Israel? We don't share the same border. We never went to war against each other. The last time we had a conflict was the days of Esther and Mordecai. That was many, many years ago. What's the problem? In one word, the Muslim agenda. They will never, ever tolerate the existence of a Jewish state in the heart of what they call land holy to Islam. It's amazing that nobody in the world is asking the question, what is your problem with Israel? Because once you bring in religion, oh, don't talk about religion to us. We don't understand it. Let's talk politics. No, it's about religion. Let me ask you once again, what is the problem of Iran with Israel? They're not Arabs. They cannot say that they're fighting for their Arab brothers and sisters. One agenda. Islam will never accept the existence of a Jewish state in what they call the heart of Muslim territory. And Syria is an essential link. Everything that gets closer to our borders, either into Gaza or to Lebanon, and now to Syria, is coming from Iran. So a weak regime, but a major problem. By the way, the problem in Syria, the problem in Syria is not just those clans, etc. It's an ethnic problem. Syria is a creation made by France. They got their independence in 1946. And the groups in Syria have nothing in common. The regime is made of the Alawite, which is a form of Shia Islam. 15% of the population. The others are Sunnis and Kurds and Druze. We speak about an ethnic issue in Syria. Egypt doesn't have these issues. It's one ethnos, one people. But Syria, a total chaos. Now, under normal circumstances, the regime or the president will get on the first plane and will find shelter in Qatar or other places, and many countries around the world that are willing to host Bashar al-Assad. He cannot. Because if he leaves, his whole ethnos is going to be eliminated. 2.5 million people will be killed, butchered by the Sunnis. 1982, there was no internet, there was no CNN yet. In 1982, in June, in Syria, his father, Hafez al-Assad, butchered 20,000 Muslim Brotherhood members in the city of Hama. The people that carry out the war in Syria now are their children. They are seeking revenge. And once the war started and instability prevails, everybody is drawn in. Everybody. Every group in the world which is Muslim and has access to arms has some people in Syria. And now it's ISIS, which makes things even worse. Once again, the clock is ticking and we can't just cover everything. So let me say only one thing, if I may, about what really attracts the West, ISIS. The number one, it's IS now. I heard that in the US, some they call them ISIL, all right? The Islamic State in the Levant. Levant is a French term that speaks about the Near East, basically, all right? IS, Islamic State. Why limit their territory? It's Islamic State. They're supposed to rule everywhere. Islamic State has an agenda. Separated from Al-Qaeda only 3 years ago. It was one group until 3 years ago. Al-Qaeda was in the opinion that we should strike the very heart of Western countries. We should take the war to the US. To remind you, 9/11. ISIS says, no. First, we need to consolidate our forces as Muslims in the Middle East. And only then, as one strong power, we should attack the West. That was the ideological difference. And when you listen to ISIS spokespeople, they do not understand why they're attacked by the West. They tell you, hey, it's a problem within the Muslim ranks. What do you care? And what is our answer? Well, you know what, we don't like to see those beheadings. We're afraid that you're going to grow to be very strong, so we're going to invoke. But they do not understand it. They said, we did not proclaim war on the West. So why are you attacking us? It's a local problem. Let me put it this way. Islam does not have to proclaim war on the West. Islam is at war with everybody ever since Islam was born. Once again, that's what the Quran teaches. And as you notice, I was going for about an hour and said nothing about Israel and the Palestinians. Amazing, huh? So add that will take me another 2.5 hours. We just don't have the time. But again, just a little taste, if possible, because things are complicated, not easy to understand. The problem is that governments don't have the privilege to be confused. You accept leaders to lead. You accept people to know what's going on and to make courageous steps. And once again, who are the good people, who are the bad people, how are you going to support? A lot of confusion. I need to stop here because it's 10 o'clock, and I promise that I'll be done by 10 o'clock. I'm not sure how much you're educated today. And once again, it's about knowing. We have to know because, again, you're voting and we are voting. We're voting for people that have a certain agenda, and many people vote out of ignorance, and that's fine. It happens all around the world. But it's becoming a personal issue because your boys and girls once again will be sent to the Middle East. It's inevitable. If America wants to maintain its power as a world leader, you can't help it. You may want to pull out if possible, they're coming after you. Even if the US decides to disengage totally, don't make any mistakes. Because the other party has a plan, they say it loud and clear. So what are we waiting for? To fight in the streets of New York or Jerusalem? Once again, the alternatives are much worse than what happens now. And once again, for the 5th time this morning, we are sick and tired from wars and bloodshed. We want peace, just leave us alone. But they won't. The question is always, what's the alternative? Time after time to lose our loved ones, time after time to go to war. For the US, it's an experience overseas. In my country, it happens right on our doorsteps. What's the alternative? Waiting for a few years is going to make things better? Maybe worse. I don't have an answer. Bottom line, from the Israeli perspective, God is good. And I'm telling you that without much faith, to survive in such an area, if it wasn't for God's plan, that would be impossible. And I'm saying that this week because in a few days Israel is going to celebrate its 67th anniversary. So we're not an infant state anymore, but there's still a lot to do. And we accomplished so much under the pressure of tension in the area. Come and see. It's amazing to see how beautiful and how quiet, yes, and peaceful is the country. Under those regional circumstances, once again I'm telling you, if it wasn't for God keeping His promise for His people, and I'm privileged to live in a generation to see that happen, that would not work. When God is with you, who can be against you? Thank you.
We won't have a closing song, so we're just a little late. So let's all stand and close in prayer. Well, Lord, we thank you for a quick synopsis of what's going on in the Middle East. We realize, Lord, the problems go way beyond human ability to solve. We know your word says, Lord, there won't be peace in the Middle East or around the world until the Prince of Peace comes and establishes a kingdom. So, Lord, we look for His return, our Savior, Jesus Christ. And, Lord, give us grace to be praying for our leaders, for Israel. And, Lord, we just pray that our President and our Congress and the Israeli leaders, Lord, that you would give them wisdom to do whatever they can do. But, Lord, it's all coming to a head. We know that. We just pray, Lord, for the peace of Jerusalem, though. Your word says they shall prosper that love thee. We just pray, Lord, that you'll continue to bless Ronnie's trip, stay in America, and his speaking engagements. And Lord, we thank you. We ask all this now in Jesus' name. Amen.